the unborn. What is the goal of Buddhist practice? Most people say enlightenment, liberation, the end of suffering. The Buddha used a different word. He used a word that means extinguishing, like a fire going out. And for 2,500 years, that word has troubled people. Some have found it strange. Some have found it disturbing. Some have looked at the tradition's highest teaching and seen nothing, as if what waits at the end of the path is annihilation, as if the goal of Buddhism is to stop existing tonight, what the word actually means, why it is, in fact, the most hopeful teaching in this entire tradition, and why, in the previous video, a German philosopher named Arthur Schopenhauer came close to grasping it and missed by exactly one canonical text. 45 videos in this series have been building a map. The 3 characteristics, the 4 noble truths, the 8-fold path, the practice moments where craving lifts and the mind rests, even briefly. Through all of it, one word has been sitting in the footnotes. The destination the entire path points toward. The unconditioned that stands behind the conditioned. Nibbāna. Tonight, we look at the destination itself. Not the map, the territory. What the canon actually says. What the misconceptions are. And what this teaching offers you right now in how you are living today. But first, a fire, and the question that no one could answer. Chapter 1. The previous video ended with a German philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer, 19th century, the first serious Western thinker to read the Buddhist texts with any real care. And when he came to nirvana, the Sanskrit form of nibbana, he called it nothing to those still full of will. He was right about something important. From inside a mind that is grasping, that is craving, that is trying to become, the cessation of craving does look like nothing. Nothing to reach for, nothing to become, nothing to hold. Schopenhauer saw that much clearly, but the Buddhist texts add something Schopenhauer missed. One short passage from a small collection called the Udana. We will come to it in chapter 2. For now, only this. The difference between nothing and the unconditioned is exactly what this teaching is about. And that difference begins with the word itself. Nibbāna, the Pali word, literally means extinguishing, or going out. It is built from the same root as nibbūta, a term used for a fire that has been quenched, or for something that has cooled. When the tradition uses this word for the goal of the path, it is drawing on a very old image, a fire that was burning, and is not burning any longer, which raises the question every serious student of this teaching eventually asks. What exactly is extinguished? The most direct canonical answer comes from a short exchange in the Samyutta Nikaya. The Venerable Sariputta is asked by a wanderer named Jambukadaka what Nibbāna is. Sariputta does not describe a place. He does not describe an afterlife. He gives what may be the shortest and most precise definition in the entire canon. SN 38:1. The destruction of passion, the destruction of aversion, the destruction of delusion. This friend is called Nibbāna. 3 things: passion, aversion, delusion. In the tradition, these are called the 3 poisons, or, tellingly, the 3 fires. And Nibbāna is the going out of those fires. What is extinguished is not you. It is what has been burning in you. The tradition often speaks of craving as a fever, and of Nibbāna as the cool, a state of no longer burning. The flame that goes out is not your existence. It is the fever, which sounds simple, but hold on to it, because everything else in this video depends on it. If Nibbāna is the extinguishing of passion, aversion, and delusion, not the extinguishing of the person, then the first great misconception falls apart immediately. Nibbāna is not annihilation. The one who reaches Nibbāna does not stop existing. The three fires go out. What remains is a person no longer burning, a mind no longer driven by grasping, no longer thrown by aversion, no longer confused about what is happening. And yet the same person walks and eats and speaks and eventually dies. The going out of the fires is not the going out of the being, but Schopenhauer's question. And it is a question millions of readers have asked since. Was never really about the arahant while alive. It was about after death. What happens to an awakened person after death? Is there something? Nothing? Some third thing? The Buddha faced this question directly in one of the most remarkable dialogues in the canon. MN 72, the Agivacchagotta Sutta, which means in plain English, to Vacchagotta, on fire. The wanderer Vacchagotta comes to the Buddha with a list of 10 metaphysical questions. Is the cosmos eternal? Is it not eternal? Is it finite, infinite? Is the soul the same as the body, different from the body? And, the four that mattered most to him, after death, does a Tathagata exist? Not exist? Both? Neither? To all 10, the Buddha answers, no. Not yes. Not I don't know. No. He does not hold any of these views. Vacchagotta is bewildered. He asks the Buddha why. And the Buddha gives an extraordinary answer. Each of these questions, he says, is a thicket of views, a wilderness, a fetter. Not because the questions are unimportant, but because they assume something that is not there. They assume a fixed entity called the Tathagata, or the cosmos, or the soul. An entity to which exists and does not exist can be simply applied. Then, seeing Vacchagotta still confused, the Buddha turns to a fire. Suppose a fire is burning in front of you. Do you know that it is burning? Yes. And what is that fire burning on? Grass and timber. Suppose the fire goes out. Do you know that it has gone out? Yes. And suppose someone asked you, in what direction has that fire gone? East, west, north, or south? Vacchagotta answers, the question does not apply. The fire was burning in dependence on grass and timber. When that ran out and no more was added, the fire, as the tradition puts it, is classified simply as out. The Buddha then says, in the same way, any physical form by which someone might describe the Tathagata, that form the Tathagata has abandoned, cut off at the root, made like a palm stump, not destined for future arising, freed from the classification of form Vaccha. The Tathagata is deep, boundless, hard to fathom, like the sea. Two similes, the extinguished fire and the boundless sea. The point is not that the awakened person becomes nothing after death. The point is that the categories of exist does not exist both, and neither the categories we would use for a burning fire, or a chair, or a stone, cannot be applied. The Tathagata is not describable in those terms even while alive. Asking whether he exists after death is applying the wrong categories to what was never a fixed entity in the first place. There is a related sutta that makes this even more sharply. SN 2285. The monk Yamaka has come to believe that when an arahant dies, he simply ceases to exist, annihilated. Sariputta approaches him, not to argue, to ask a series of questions. Do you regard the Tathagata as form? No. As in form? No. As apart from form? No. As feeling, perception, fabrications, consciousness? No. No. And then Sariputta delivers the crucial line. If here even now, my friend, the Tathagata is not to be found as real and actual, is it fitting for you to say that at death he is annihilated? Even alive, the Tathagata cannot be located as a fixed entity in any of the 5 aggregates. So the question of what happens to that entity after death applies wrong categories from the start. Yamaka realizes his error. He abandons the annihilation view. Which brings us to the second great misconception. If Nibbāna is not annihilation, is it then paradise? An eternal blissful state, permanent and unchanging, where the self enjoys peace forever? No. And the reason it cannot be paradise, in that specific sense, is precisely the same reason it cannot be annihilation. Because the anatṭā teaching, the teaching that there is no permanent, unchanging self among the aggregates, rules out both. If there is no permanent self to be annihilated, there is also no permanent self to enjoy eternal bliss. Both misconceptions are built on the same false assumption, that there is a fixed someone whose fate we are trying to specify. Nibbāna does not give that someone a good ending. It reveals that there was never that kind of someone to begin with. There is another sutta that draws this line even more precisely. SN 12.15, the Kaccayanagotta Sutta. Kaccayana asks the Buddha about right view, and the Buddha says, everything exists. This is one extreme. Everything does not exist. This is the second extreme. Without going to either extreme, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle. 2 extremes, existence and non-existence, being and non-being, paradise and annihilation. Nibbāna is beyond both, which means that when we ask, is Nibbāna existence or non-existence? The Buddhist answer is neither. Not because the tradition is being evasive, because the question itself is trapped inside a binary that the teaching is trying to release us from, which leaves a real question, and one the tradition does answer. If Nibbāna is not annihilation, if it is not paradise, if it is beyond existence and non-existence, what then is it? The canon has a word for it, and a passage, and a strange, careful logic that has been waiting since the opening of this video. That is chapter 2. Chapter 2. Chapter 1 cleared the ground. Nibbāna is not annihilation, not paradise, not existence, not non-existence. Every one of the categories most readers reach for first is a wrong category. But this is not, on its own, a satisfying place to leave the teaching. It says only what Nibbāna is not. It does not yet say what Nibbāna is. And here the tradition is careful. There is a passage, very short, 4 lines only, that many teachers consider the most direct positive statement in the entire canon on this subject. It is from a small collection called the Udana. The word means inspired utterance, brief teachings the Buddha spoke on his own initiative, not in response to a question. The passage is Ud 8.8.3, and it reads, there is, monks, an unborn, an unbecome, an unmade, an unfabricated. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, there would be no escape from the born, the become, the made, the fabricated. But precisely because there is an unborn, an unbecome, an unmade, an unfabricated, there is discerned an escape from the born, the become, the made, the fabricated. Read carefully. This is not a description. It is an argument. The Buddha is not saying, let me tell you about a wonderful place. He is saying, liberation is possible. That is the observation. And if liberation is possible, if escape from suffering, from craving, from the whole conditioned pattern of experience is actually possible, then there must be something that is not itself part of that conditioned pattern. Because you cannot escape a burning house by moving to another burning house. You cannot escape the conditioned by moving to another conditioned thing. So, the unconditioned exists, not as a matter of belief, as a matter of logical necessity, because escape has been reported, because escape has been achieved, because the Buddha himself is standing in front of the monks he is speaking to, describing what he found. There must be an unborn, there must be an unmade, there must be an unconditioned. Otherwise, none of this would be possible. And that is the argument. The Buddha's own quest, the tradition says, was oriented toward this from the beginning. In one of the most important autobiographical passages in the canon, MN 26, The Noble Search, he describes what he was looking for before he found it. He was looking, he says, for what is unborn, unaging, undying, unsorrowing, unstained, for the unsurpassed security from bondage, which the tradition calls Nibbāna. The Pali terms all take the same form: not born, not aging, not dying. The prefix means un, absent, free of. He is not looking for a better version of the conditioned world. He is looking for what stands outside it. And when he finds it, he does not give it one name. He gives it 33. There is a collection in the Samyutta Nikaya called the Asankata Samyutta, the Discourses on the Unconditioned, SN 43. Across its short suttas, the Buddha lists name after name for what he has realized. Some are descriptive, some are honorific. All of them point at the same thing: the deathless, the peaceful, the stainless, the island, the shelter, the refuge, freedom, the beyond, the subtle, the unaging, the stable, the incomparable, the truth, the further shore, the cool. 33 names, some of them nouns of quality, subtle, stable, peaceful, some of them nouns of function, shelter, refuge, protection, some of them almost geographical, the island, the beyond, the further shore. The point is not to memorize them. The point is what they collectively refuse to be. None of them is heaven. None of them is paradise. None of them is the pleasant afterlife. None of them is nothingness. The tradition is not short of vocabulary for what defies definition. It offers 33. What it never offers is the category the average Western imagination reaches for first. A place where nice things happen to a permanent self who is enjoying them. This is deliberate. The tradition is protecting the teaching from its two most common misreadings, the ones we identified in Chapter 1. Every one of these 33 names is compatible with anatṭā. None of them requires a permanent self to be true, which brings us to a distinction the tradition considers important, and which many readers encountering it for the first time find surprising. Nibbāna is not one thing, it is two. The passage is Iti 44, from the Itivuttaka. The Buddha says, monks, there are these two Nibbāna elements. What are the two? The Nibbāna element with fuel remaining, and the Nibbāna element with no fuel remaining. The Pali terms asa upadisesa and anupadisesa. The first with fuel remaining, the second with no fuel remaining. And notice the language. The fire imagery we saw in MN 72 has not gone away. It is still here, in the technical description of what the Arahant has attained. Thanissaro's commentary makes the image explicit. In the first case, the flames are out, but the embers are still glowing. In the second, the fire is so thoroughly out that the embers themselves have grown cold. The fuel, in both cases, is the five aggregates, the body, the stream of perception, the whole conditioned assembly of what makes up a person. The passage continues. What is the Nibbāna element with fuel remaining? Here, monks, a monk is an arahant whose taints are destroyed, who has lived the holy life, done what had to be done, laid down the burden, reached the true goal, destroyed the fetter of becoming, is released through right knowledge. His 5 sense faculties still remain, through which, being not devoid of their function, he experiences the pleasant and the unpleasant, feels pleasure and pain. His passion is ended. His aversion is ended. His delusion is ended. This is called the Nibbāna element with fuel remaining. Read this slowly. This is a description of an awakened person still alive. The 3 fires, passion, aversion, delusion, are out. That much is complete. But the 5 sense faculties still function. He still sees, still hears, still feels. Pleasant and unpleasant experiences still occur. The arahant has not become a stone. He has not stopped perceiving. He has not lost his body's capacity to register hot and cold, sweet and sour, comfortable and uncomfortable. The physical remainder of the aggregates continues to operate. What has ended is not sensation. What has ended is what the tradition sometimes calls the second arrow. The Buddha, in another discourse, describes the ordinary person as being struck by 2 arrows. The first, the physical or unpleasant sensation itself. The second, the mental suffering that arises from grasping or resisting it. The awakened person is struck by only one. The arrow enters the flesh. It hurts. And then there is nothing added to that. No craving for it to stop. No aversion that intensifies it. No story about what it means. No self-narrative about the unfairness of pain. Just the sensation, bare, present, ending when it ends. That is the first Nibbāna element, present tense, available in this life. The one the arahant walks through his remaining years within. The second, anupadisesa, with no fuel remaining, is what the tradition calls parinibbāna. It is what happens when the arahant dies. The physical remainder ends. There is no further arising. This is what Vacchagotta was asking about in MN 72, and it is what the Buddha declined to describe in the categories of exists, does not exist, both and neither, 2 elements, one accessible while alive, one completing what the first began. And here, after all of this, is where the tradition itself keeps a certain door open, where 2 of the most careful English language translators of the canon disagree with each other, reading the same Pali. Bhikkhu Thanissaro, of the Thai forest tradition, translates the word Nibbāna as unbinding, not a place, not an objective transcendent reality, but a quality of a mind that has been released from the bindings of craving, of clinging, of the fires of the 3 poisons. On his reading, what Ad 8.3 describes is the mind's own released condition, the unbound, as encountered in the experience of an awakened being. Nibbāna is not somewhere the mind goes, it is what the mind becomes when it is no longer bound. Bhikkhu Bodhi, of the modern theravada scholarly tradition, reads the same passages differently. For him, Ud 8.3 and its parallels describe not primarily a state of mind, but an unconditioned Dhamma, anasankata, an objective reality accessible to the mind at the moment of realization. The mind, in that reading, does not become Nibbāna. The mind touches it. Nibbāna is what the awakened mind contacts, not what it turns into. Neither position claims Nibbāna is annihilation. Neither claims it is a place in the sense of paradise. Both, reading the same canonical passages, agree on what Nibbāna is not, but on what it is, on whether it is best understood as the mind's own released quality, or as an unconditioned reality the mind contacts. The 2 translators reach different conclusions. Thanissaro emphasizes unbinding. Bodhi emphasizes the unconditioned. The canon, reading it carefully, seems to leave this open, perhaps deliberately. What it insists on is the fact of liberation and the logic of what makes liberation possible. What it declines to specify is the precise metaphysical structure of the goal, because as Vacchagotta discovered, that specification would only produce another thicket of views. So the tradition does something rare among religious teachings. It describes the destination in terms of what it does, extinguishes the fires, ends the fetters, delivers release. And in terms of what it is not born, not made, not conditioned. And it leaves the deeper question, the question of what Nibbāna is in itself, in the space between two careful translations. That is what the canon says, which leaves one question we have not yet touched. If this is the destination, if the fire goes out, and the fetter of becoming ends, and the unconditioned is real, and the path has been walked by others, what does any of this have to do with you, right now, this week, in how you are living? That is chapter 3. Chapter 3. The natural response to chapter 2. After all the careful description of what Nibbāna is not, and all the deliberate ambiguity about what it is in itself, is a question that the tradition takes seriously. Fine. But what does this have to do with me? Not with an arahant, not with a monk who has been practicing for 40 years. With me, now, in the ordinary life of an ordinary person with ordinary struggles. The tradition's answer is both more honest than most people expect and more direct than the abstraction of the previous chapters would suggest. Here is the honest part first. The tradition does not promise that most practitioners will achieve full Nibbāna in this lifetime. That is not the offer. The path has stages. Arahantship, full liberation, the complete extinction of the 3 fires, is described in the canon as extraordinary, the culmination of many lifetimes of practice, by traditional Buddhist reckoning. If someone tells you that a week of meditation, or a month, or a year will deliver you the state that Ud 8.3 describes, that person is selling you something the tradition itself does not sell, but that is the extreme case. What the tradition does say is that Nibbāna is not all or nothing. The path, in canonical description, has 4 stages. The first is called stream entry, Sotapanna in Pali, one who has entered the stream. And the canonical description of what happens at stream entry is precise and permanent and remarkable. At the moment of stream entry, 3 fetters are severed. The first is the view of self as a fixed, permanent thing, not the intellectual belief that there is no self. Many people hold that intellectually. Something deeper, a direct seeing, at the level where identity is constructed, that the self was never the fixed thing it appeared to be. The second is doubt about the path, the felt understanding that this way of practice is coherent, actually leads somewhere. The third is attachment to rites and rituals as ends in themselves. The recognition that the practice is a means, not an identity. 3 fetters, cut, permanently. In canonical description, a stream enterer will not fall away from the path, even across lifetimes. Not because of will, not because of vigilance, because something structural has changed in how experience is organized. That is a partial attainment. It is not full Nibbāna, but it is real, it is irreversible, and it is described in the canon as attainable by ordinary lay practitioners as well as by monks. A number of the Buddha's householders' disciples reached it. Beyond stream entry come once returner, non-returner, arahant. 3 further stages. Each represents further fetters severed. Each represents a deeper realization of what stream entry began. The point is not that most viewers of this video will become stream enterers next week. The point is that the tradition itself insists Nibbāna is graded. There are stages. Each stage is real. Each stage is an actual touching of the destination, not the whole, but part of it. And each stage transforms what remains of the practitioner's life, which brings us to what is available before even the first stage. There is a moment familiar to anyone who has practiced meditation seriously. Sometimes it arises unbidden. You are sitting. Something in the world contacts you. A sound, a thought, a sensation. Feeling tone arises, as it always does. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And normally, the next step is instant. Craving would arise. Aversion would arise. The mind would grab or push away. That is the pattern. But sometimes, and this happens more as practice deepens, the craving simply does not follow. Contact happens, feeling arises, and then there is a gap where craving would be. And in that gap, the mind is not grasping. It is not resisting. It is simply present. And the whole ordinary pattern of suffering and pleasure does not close around the moment. That is not full Nibbāna. But it is in the territory. In those moments, briefly, some quality of the mind touches what Ut 8:3 describes, the unbound. Not permanently, not for long, sometimes only for a second, but long enough to know that this is not a theoretical destination. It is something that can actually happen to the mind. The tradition has a word for that quality. It has, in fact, many, but one of them is sukha, the same word usually translated as pleasure or happiness. And here is where the tradition says something that sounds paradoxical until you have felt what it is describing. The exchange is preserved in the Anguttara Nikaya, 934. Sariputta, the same monk who defined Nibbāna in the shortest terms in chapter 1, is speaking to a fellow monk named Udayin, and he says, "This unbinding is pleasant, friends. This unbinding is pleasant." Udayin reasonably asks, "What is the pleasure here, where there is nothing felt?" Sariputta answers, "Just that is the pleasure here, my friend, where there is nothing felt." Read that carefully. Sariputta is not saying that Nibbāna is a very intense, pleasant sensation. He is saying the opposite, that the pleasure of Nibbāna is precisely the pleasure of no longer being subject to the whole binary of pleasant and unpleasant that dominates ordinary experience. It is not the presence of positive feeling. It is the absence of the entire structure in which craving would produce suffering. For someone hearing it for the first time, this can sound flat, as if Nibbāna were merely the cessation of experience. But that is not what Sariputta means. What he means is closer to this. The highest pleasure is not the most intense, pleasant sensation. It is the release from the pattern in which sensation controls the mind. When a mind is no longer thrown by what it feels, no longer grasping the pleasant, no longer fleeing the unpleasant. That mind is in a condition the tradition describes as sukha, ease, peace, the cool. Even if from the outside, nothing about the situation looks pleasant in the ordinary sense. The Dhammapada makes this present tense in a verse many practitioners return to. DHP 203. Hunger, the foremost illness. Fabrications, the foremost pain. For one, knowing this as it actually is, unbinding is the foremost ease. And the verse immediately following. Health, the foremost possession. Contentment, the foremost wealth. Trust, the foremost relative. Unbinding, the foremost ease. Notice the tense, not will be, is. For one who sees clearly, Nibbāna is the foremost ease. Present, not a promise about a future life, a description of what is available to a mind that has learned to see through the pattern of grasping. And this is where the honest thing the tradition does, that most religious traditions do not, becomes visible. Buddhism is careful to say what the path does not deliver. It does not deliver immunity from physical pain. It does not deliver eternal youth or eternal life for a permanent self. It does not deliver escape from death. It does not deliver a permanent state of pleasant sensation. Anyone who has been sold any of those things by anyone claiming to teach Buddhism has been sold something the canon itself does not offer. What it does deliver, on its own terms, is this: a direction, and clarity about where that direction leads, and practical means by which the direction can be walked, and, crucially, the offer that some part of the destination is accessible in flashes from the very beginning. Not the whole. Some part. Return for a moment to the definition Sariputta gave in Chapter 1, SN 38.1. The destruction of passion, the destruction of aversion, the destruction of delusion. This, friend, is called Nibbāna, when you are not consumed by passion, even for a moment, even in a small matter. You are in the territory that Nibbāna is the completion of. When aversion softens even slightly, when the mind does not fight what is happening, you are in that territory. When a small confusion lifts and something is seen more clearly than it was seen the moment before, you are in that territory, not there, in that direction. Nibbāna, in the tradition's understanding, is what you get when what happens in those brief moments becomes permanent. When passion, aversion, and delusion do not merely soften but stop arising. That is the completion. The moments in ordinary practice are not the completion, but they are the same territory, the same quality, the same direction the entire path is oriented toward, which changes something in how you walk. If Nibbāna were only available at the end of the path and nowhere earlier, then the practice would be a bet. You would work for years towards something you might or might not reach. But because the quality is accessible, in small ways, from very early on, because a mind can taste even a fragment of what the Arahant knows in full, the practice is not a bet. It is a slow familiarization with a quality that is already, at moments, part of your experience. You do not walk toward Nibbāna the way you walk toward a distant city, hoping you will one day arrive. You walk toward it the way you might walk toward a note you can already faintly hear, becoming steadily clearer. That is what the tradition offers. That is what is available to the ordinary practitioner, right now, in this week, in how you meet the next difficult moment. Not the whole thing, some of it, which is more than most teachings offer, and exactly what the canon has been describing all along. There is one thing left, the strange careful logic of Ud 8.3 that has been waiting since the opening of this video. The line that says the unconditioned exists because escape has been achieved. That is the close. Close return at the end to where we began. There is a passage, 4 lines, from a small collection of the Buddha's inspired utterances. It may be the single most important sentence anywhere in the canon on the subject of the goal of the path. Ud 8.3. There is, monks, an unborn, an unbecome, an unmade, an unfabricated. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, there would be no escape from the born, the become, the made, the fabricated. But precisely because there is an unborn, an unbecome, an unmade, an unfabricated, there is discerned an escape from the born, the become, the made, the fabricated. Look at the shape of that argument. It moves in 2 directions, and each direction confirms the other. The first direction is negative. If there were no unconditioned, there would be no escape from the conditioned. This is a structural claim about what escape from a pattern requires. You cannot escape a burning house by moving to another burning house. You cannot escape the pattern of conditioned experience. of craving producing suffering, of grasping producing more grasping, of the whole cycle in which the mind is caught, by moving to another conditioned thing. If the escape is real, then something must exist that is not itself part of the pattern, something outside it, something the mind can be released into. Otherwise, the escape is a fantasy, and the whole path a delusion. The second direction is positive. Because the unconditioned exists, escape is discerned. This is not just an inference from the first direction. It is testimony. The Buddha is speaking as someone who has achieved what he is describing. He is not making an abstract argument about possibility. He is describing what he found. The unconditioned exists. Therefore, actually, in practice, in the experience of an awakened being, escape has been walked, not theorized. Walked. The two directions together give you the whole of the passage. Read the sutta as a proof. Escape from the conditioned would be impossible without the unconditioned. Read it as a testimony. The unconditioned exists, and therefore escape is discerned in the experience of one who has attained it. The passage does both at once. Take away either reading, and the sentence loses half its weight. Together, they carry the teaching. That is what Ud 8.3 is doing. It is not describing a place. It is establishing a fact, something that stands outside the entire pattern of grasping and suffering, something that makes release from that pattern possible, actually exists. The tradition builds on this. The path presupposes it, and the passage is where the assertion is stated in its simplest form. Now to the fire. Vacchagotta in chapter 1 could not answer the question the Buddha asked him. Which direction has the fire gone? East, west, north, south, he said. The question does not apply. When a fire goes out, it does not go anywhere. What ended was not a journey. What ended was a certain kind of burning. The fire was conditioned. It burned in dependence on fuel, in dependence on oxygen, in dependence on heat. When those conditions ended, the fire was no longer that kind of thing. It was not annihilated. It was not moved. It was released from the conditions that made it a fire in the first place. Think about that for a moment. The fire, while burning, was defined by its conditions. Take those away, and there is no longer a fire to have a location, a direction, a destination. Not because the fire was destroyed, but because the categories that applied to the burning fire no longer apply. Asking where the extinguished fire has gone is like asking what color the number 3 is. The question is not answered. It is dissolved. And this is the image the tradition uses for what happens to a mind at liberation. What ends is not you. What ends is a mind burning with the 3 fires: passion, aversion, delusion. Those 3, and the whole architecture of grasping and pushing away that they drive, go out, extinguished, cooled, unbound. And what remains is a mind that is no longer caught in that pattern. Where does that mind go? The question does not apply. It is not going anywhere. It is being released from what it was burning on, and what it becomes, or contacts, depending on which of our 2 translators you follow, is not describable in the categories of exists and does not exist, because those are categories for conditioned things. What is unconditioned is not a thing among things. It is what the tradition calls in 33 different ways, the unborn. That is the destination the entire path is oriented toward. And in this video, we have looked at it in as many angles as one video can. We have cleared the 2 great misconceptions. Nibbāna is not annihilation, because there was never a fixed self to be annihilated. That was the point of the Yamaka discourse and the fire dialogue of chapter 1. Nibbāna is not paradise, because there was never a fixed self to enjoy eternal pleasures. That is the same anatṭā teaching, applied in the other direction. Both misreadings collapse for the same reason. We have looked at what the canon does say: the unborn, the unmade, the unconditioned, the peaceful, the deathless, the stable, the cool. 33 names, and none of them a place where nice things happen. Each of them pointing at what the tradition considers describable in negation, but not in positive assertion. Because positive assertions in the language of the conditioned would only produce again another thicket of views. We have looked at the two aspects: the nibbana with fuel remaining, the arahant still alive, 3 fires out, still perceiving the world, still walking through pleasant and unpleasant experiences, but no longer thrown by them, and the nibbana without fuel remaining, parinibbana, the physical remainder ending, and no further arising. We have looked at where 2 of the tradition's most careful English language translators diverge. Thanissaro reading nibbana as unbinding, a quality of the released mind. Bodhi reading it as the unconditioned Dhamma, a reality the mind contacts. And we have seen that the canon itself, perhaps deliberately, does not resolve the disagreement. It seems to have been left open, because to resolve it would be to specify the goal in exactly the terms the Buddha refused to give, vacchagotta. And we have looked at what any of this offers to someone who has not attained arahantship, which is most people, and probably will not in this lifetime. What it offers is the direction, the graded path, stream entry, real and irreversible, canonically available to householders. And, before even that, the moments in ordinary practice when craving does not arise where it would have arisen, and the mind is not thrown by what it feels, and something in the pattern loosens. Those moments are not full nibbana, but they are in that territory. The same quality, the same direction. The tradition does not promise more than it delivers. It does not promise less either. Which brings the video to what may be the strangest and most stable thing this teaching offers. The unborn is not far away. It is not in a distant future. It is not on the other side of death. It is not somewhere the mind must travel to reach. It is what the mind touches, in flashes, in fragments, before any full attainment, in the small space before craving arises, in the half-second of stillness between contact and grasping, in the moment when aversion could rise and briefly does not, in the pause between the first arrow of sensation and the second arrow of grasping. The pause where the second arrow simply does not follow. That is the territory. It has always been the territory. The path is simply how a mind learns to recognize it, first in fragments, and eventually, at the completion, as its permanent condition. 46 videos in this series have been building toward the recognition. The 3 characteristics that describe the conditioned. The 4 noble truths that map suffering and its release. The 8-fold path that walks the terrain. The practice moments where the mind rests. Every one of those was pointing at something that was never far away. Not a destination in the sense of a place you arrive at, a condition in which release is possible. The unborn. There is such a thing. The canon is clear about it. The logic is clear about it. 2,500 years of practice have been clear about it. The rest is practice.